Hello and welcome to Sansad TV. You're watching Viewpoint with me, Frank RAUSAN. Well, Mark Carney's election as Prime Minister of Canada could mark a dramatic shift in strained India-Canada relations that deteriorated under Justin Trudeau. For India, this change in leadership opens a window to recalibrate diplomatic, economic and immigration ties with one of the top destinations for Indian students and skilled workers. In this edition of Viewpoint, we will analyze if there could be a possible reset of ties between India and Canada under Carney and the new Prime Minister's top priorities. Joining me on the program today are Professor Pant, Vice President, Foreign Policy Observer Research Foundation, and Ambassador Niraj Srivastava, Career Diplomat. Thank you to both my guests for joining me on this edition of Viewpoint. Ambassador, let me start the program with you first. Let's first try and understand the election per se as a whole. How would you look back at the recently concluded Canadian election?
I think it was a very important election in Canada's history. Where many important issues were involved. And it is a transformative kind of, I would say, election. The result, for example, was transformative because compared to the previous regime, this particular newly elected government has different priorities. First thing. Second, I think it was an election where nationalism played a big role. You know, the Canadians viewing themselves as separate from the United States. That was an important part of this election. And then, of course, the third dimension was that the party led by Jagmeet Singh, who were supporters of Khalistan, they lost, a great deal of their support. So in that sense, it is positive for India because the previous government was hostage to the NDP led by Jagmeet Singh. So I would say that it is an historic election both for Canada's internal situation as well as foreign policy dimension, particularly relating to India. Because, the other, I would say, as far as India-Canada relations are concerned, this was probably the most important election since our independence, because the ties had been strained to such an extent that, there were no ambassadors in the two countries. The diplomatic staff was drastically reduced. There was not even a kind of a working relationship, with this country where 3% of the population is of Canadian origin. So it was, from that point of view also, it was a transformative election.
Absolutely. Professor, let me bring you into the picture now. Let's try and understand and analyze a little bit, dig a little deeper into what the ambassador has just brought to the table about, what are the factors do you think that influenced these elections?
Frank, I would say the three T's. You had Trudeau, Trump and tariffs. And if you analyze individually, that's how an election that was supposed to be won by the Liberals, by the Conservatives, eventually was won by the Liberals. So you go back to a few months and you see, the political landscape was completely different. The Liberals were looking as if they were going to be defeated in a very big way. Trudeau was losing popularity. Trudeau was one of the most was being viewed as an ineffective leader, as a leader under whose leadership Canada was There were challenges, multiple challenges on multiple fronts. And I think Trudeau's image was becoming a problem for the Liberals. So the first thing that they did was to remove Trudeau. As Trudeau went out, and Mark Carney took in. Even then, there were questions whether Mark Carney, who had never before contested an election, who was not a politician, who had worked in the private sector, would be able to turn around the fortunes of the Liberals. But gradually, I think what happened was that he was helped. Carney's candidacy, Carney's political fortunes were helped by what happened in the U.S. And as Trump took over, the sense of that he wanted to make Canada the 51st state of the U.S. and the way he doubled down on that narrative. It had the rallying around the flag effect, which brought the Canadians together in opposition to the US in ways that is quite unprecedented. We have not seen this phenomenon in a long time. The sense of nationalism that it generated in Canada. And on top of that, when he levied those tariffs on Canada, and when he targeted Canada, a country that had been one of the closest partners of the US, there was a sense of betrayal, there was a sense of lack of trust in Washington. And I think all that solidified support for Mark Carney, who was seen as someone who perhaps had the best chance of not only standing up to Trump, but also bringing back the Canadian economy on tracks. So I think largely what you see in the results is this change of fortunes for both political parties in a relatively short period of time, in a manner that is quite unprecedented, both for Canadian politics, but also politics in general, because that's what we see. A political party that was supposed to be on the margins suddenly bounced back in a big way. And I think now that that they will have to govern and they will have to position themselves. You saw how one of the first statements that Mark Carney gave after winning was all about Trump. That this is going to be Canada will stand up to Trump. Canada will stand up to the US. And the old relationship with the US is gone. That's what he said. So clearly, I think by defining his politics, by defining the politics of the Liberals standing up to American hegemony, American, what somewhat call brinkmanship on tariffs and other matters, led to this result, which I think many in America would also now be doing, that they had a conservative so close to power, but suddenly now with what had happened, the fortunes changed and a very different result came out.
Absolutely. Okay, the three T's really had a big role to play as far as this election was concerned. Trump, tariffs and Trudeau is what Professor Pant is suggesting. All right, Ambassador, let me bring you into the picture once again. Let's talk about, we've spoken about how the political landscape has changed, how Canada is going through a difficult phase as well because of what the United States and Trump particularly has been doing and has been saying about Canada. What do you think are going to be the top priorities really as far as the new Prime Minister is concerned?
The new Prime Minister has to show, he has to demonstrate to his people that he is not intimidated by Mr. Trump's rhetoric. That is a very important thing, because nobody liked hearing that Canada should become the 51st state of the United States. So this he will show, and some of his initial statements, he has already started saying this, that establishing the distinctiveness of Canada from America. So this is an important thing. The other thing is, what will he do about tariffs? Because if Mr. Trump, he has paused it for 90 days, but ultimately what happens, will be important. So he has to tackle the tariff issue also. And that, I think, his skills as a former governor of Bank of England, and should come in handy as an economist. So this is the second thing. From India's point of view, the third important thing is what does he do to Canada's India policy? And there, one thing it is true that the Jagmeet Singh faction has lost, but there are, both parties, the Conservatives and the Liberals, they still have significant elements which support the Khalistani issue. So we will have to see how he tackles that. Of course, I'm sure he's not as dependent as Trudeau was on on that party, so that he's got more freedom, more elbow room. But he will have to take steps to repair the relations with India, and there the ball is in his court, because it started with Canada. They're trying to mollycoddle the Khalistani lobby. So he has to make it clear to India what is more important to him: relations with India important to him, or the Khalistani issue, which is also linked to terrorism. So I suppose politically these are the issues which will be important. And as far as India is concerned, we will get an early signal if whether or not Prime Minister Modi is invited for the next G7 meeting, which is going to be held in June in Canada.
Absolutely. Talking about signals, Professor, Prime Minister Modi has already congratulated, Carney on his victory, and we are also hopeful that there will be a reset in ties, and we've seen the ties reach a nadir really as far as India and Canada are concerned. So from an Indian perspective, how do you see things panning out?
I think it's certainly, Frank, a moment perhaps to take a step back and to recalibrate a relationship that had been very, very critical for India and for Canada for a number of reasons. For Canada, of course, at this point in time, economic diversification is a key priority, given what they are facing with the US, and given that the relations with China are not particularly strong. I think India emerges as a country of choice. So clearly, Carney has an incentive to build those ties, to rebuild those ties, and he has indicated as much in his statements, during the campaign. When he was asked, he has said that, look, it is very important for us to reach out to economic centers like India, and then the center of gravity is shifting in that direction. So he has indicated that, and clearly we saw, as you were mentioning, Prime Minister Modi congratulating him and putting a more forward-looking spin on the relationship. And I think that's very important, because clearly what had happened in the relationship is that Mr. Trudeau had become such a big symbol of all that was going wrong, that it was very difficult to engage with Mr. Trudeau. And I think that point was being made repeatedly, that with Mr. Trudeau in office, it was very difficult to reassess the relationship, to rebuild the relationship, to put the relationship back on track. Now that he's gone, although the party is the same, and some of the undercurrent of support for some of the constituencies in Canada would remain. But I think by and large, Mr. Carney has been a very pragmatic individual all his life, and I think his focus on economic and trade issues, given the challenges that he's facing from the US, gives this opening a real certainty. And I think it is in India's interest, it is in Canada's interest to build this relationship, and I'm sure that relationship will be gradually rebuilt, as we are witnessing from the statements that have come out immediately after elections on both sides. But I think it is going to be a slow process, given how damaging some of those activities have been of Canada, and given how it has dented the very strong people-to-people engagement that the two countries have had. But again, countries go through these problems and eventually come out of that if there is political will. And it does seem that from Prime Minister Modi's statement that India is willing to move on. And I think Carney has indicated that he is also keen to put the focus back on what matters, which is trade and economic ties and people-to-people engagement, and not look back at what had happened and how that was handled. So I think there are challenges here in terms of managing the issue. But I think, and that was always the case. Let's remember that, Sikh extremism, separatism issue had always been there in Canada. It was that in the last few decades where Canadian politics has started managing it better. It has started prioritizing strategic ties with India. I think under Trudeau, the reverse happened, and that's where the challenge really emerged. So now, if Carney is able to put it back on track, I think he would be doing a great service to the relationship, and India has indicated that it is willing to move in that direction as well.
Absolutely. Ambassador, since we are here, let's talk about this aspect as well. Traditionally, we've had very warm relations with Canada. People-to-people ties have been extremely good. But this, Khalistani issue has always been there on the back burner, has always been a needling thorn in our flesh, so to speak. Now, that is a big issue as far as India is concerned, and we need it to be addressed at the earliest. But circumstances as they are, it may be a little challenging. It may take some time really to be addressed. In the interim, are there some areas that we can work on immediately to fix, to try and at least take the relationship forward in the right direction?
Sure. I think in 2 or 3 areas, developments could happen. First is the political relationship, where both sides have given forward-looking positive statements. Canada will need to convince the Indian leadership and the Indian people that it is a well-wisher of India, a friend of India, and not really supports the Khalistan question. So that is important, and I think that is India's bottom line also, because that is a very sensitive issue for India. The second issue is, trade and investment and people-to-people relations, especially, the question of Indian students studying in Canada. Indian students constitute a very large chunk of foreign students studying in Canada. And many of them go on to stay on in Canada, take jobs and, become Canadian nationals and so on and so forth. So there we will have to see that Canada should inspire confidence, amongst Indian students, that it is a well-meaning, it's safe and attractive destination for study and for work. And I think finally the machinery for bilateral relationship, which is basically constituted by the embassies and the support staff of the 2 countries. That machinery will have to be restored, because the relationship is very wide, requires a lot of attention, and therefore requires also a lot of personnel on the ground. At present, there is, just a caretaker kind of presence. So, Canada will have to inspire confidence in India that slowly, the missions should be brought back to life and should start playing their role. And we will see, as I said earlier, an early test will be the G7 summit.
Sure, absolutely. Professor, coming back to you now, as far as the relationship between India and Canada is concerned, looking at what's happening around us with, tariff wars, with all of that's happening, could this also be an opportunity really for India and Canada to try and further streamline some kind of a trade agreement to ensure that the bilateral trade between the two countries goes up as well?
Absolutely, and I think, Frank, that would be the most important priority area for the two countries, and should be, and it most likely will be, because look, we know that the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement that the two nations have been trying to work on since 2008 was put on a back burner in 2023 because of the decline in the bilateral ties. And I think it will have to be revived now, given how serious India is about these kind of partnerships, economic partnerships among like-minded countries. And this is, again, an indication that Carney himself has given in one of his statements, that we are willing to work with like-minded nations like India on economic matters. So I think this whole logic of how the global economic dynamic is changing, where countries are willing to enter into economic partnerships only with trusted partners, political partners, that gives incentives and impetus to this very important economic aspect of this relationship, and something that was put on a back burner because of the bilateral ties going down, and now will have to be revived and hopefully concluded. India is negotiating, as you know, BTA with the US, with the EU, and I think there is a fresh momentum in many of these engagements, given the changing global economic environment. And certainly for Canada also this matters, given that they are under pressure from the US. So I think that will absolutely have to be at the top of the agenda as the two nations try to rebuild their ties. And we also know that despite diplomatic tensions, economic ties actually in some ways were insulated. We did not see a decline in India-Canada trade ties despite political tensions, which is again a remarkable, I think, resilience in the relationship, which underscores this resilience, that people-to-people ties, whether people going from Canada to India and so on, or trade ties were not that dramatically affected as perhaps people had imagined when political ties were fraying. So I think we can build from this, we can build our economic ties, we can build our societal interactions once again, and gradually I think this will also allow the political ties to come back on track, as we know that there is a desire now on both sides to do that.
Absolutely. All right, gentlemen, we'll get concluding remarks now from the both of you on the best way forward and what next, starting first with the Ambassador.
Well, what next? I hope that that our PM is invited to the G7 summit, because that will give him an opportunity to directly interact at the topmost level. When interaction takes place at that level, you can do many things very quickly, which would otherwise take a long time. You can rebuild the political relationship, the economic, commercial, and people-to-people relationship. Even if the visit does not take place, I think the Indian government would welcome concrete steps from Canada to demonstrate that Canada is sensitive to India's security concerns, that Canada, does not let this Khalistan issue define the relationship between the two countries. Because, frankly speaking, having served in Canada myself, there is really no problem between India and Canada. They're both open societies, democracies, good people-to-people relationships, and so this should be the agenda. The sooner it happens, the better it is.
Absolutely. Sooner it happens, the better it is, and we hope that things fall into place sooner rather than later. All right, Professor, if you're still with us, please conclude the show please close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
Frank, I think there is a new moment in the relationship. This is a new opportunity in the relationship to rebuild ties that have actually gone to the Nadir under Trudeau. As politics evolves in Canada and moves forward, perhaps India and Canada can ensure that those issues that should deserve attention, like trade, commerce, and Indo-Pacific, as well as people-to-people engagements, they are given priority. And Canada, if it can demonstrate that it remains sensitive and alive to Indian security concerns, even if unable to address them completely at this point, that indication that it is alive to Indian sensitivities would be enough to rebuild a relationship that had been very healthy in the past, but because of, I think, the inability of Mr. Trudeau's dispensation to keep domestic politics away from a strategic relationship, it became such a problematic state of affairs. I hope that can be transcended with the new administration in Ottawa.
All right, gentlemen, we'll have to leave it at that. Thank you so much for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. Much appreciate your time here on Sansad TV. So what's coming out of this discussion is that the election was influenced by the 3 T's: Trump, tariffs and Trudeau. And Mark Carney, of course, has got several things that he needs to sort out and put in place as far as Canada is concerned. Economy and trade being on the top of the list, and of course the relationship with India as well. The time is right for a comprehensive economic partnership agreement with India, something that we've been working on from 2008 but went on the back burner as a result of the relationship, going through a rough phase. Now is the time to get all these things in order, work out on sorting out our missions as well, so that the political and diplomatic relationship too flourishes. That's it from me. See you again next time.